Welcome to the Voxgig podcast. We talk to people in the developer community about developer relations, public speaking, and community events. For more details, visit voxgig.com/podcast. All right, let's get started. Let's talk to Alvin Bryan, who is a developer advocate at Contentful. Contentful is a classic SaaS startup, and Alvin's role is a classic developer relations role. He's new to the game, has only been doing it for about 6 months so far, and is eager to tell us how it's going. The interesting thing is that Alvin has made a deliberate choice to move from front-end development into developer relations. And for anyone else thinking of making that career change, this will be a particularly interesting podcast. In particular, we talk about the importance of having a connection and an understanding for the product that your company is selling. You can't advocate for something that you don't feel any real passion or interest in. We also talk about thinking where to position yourself in the 3 Cs of developer relations: code, content, or community. You don't necessarily have to do all 3, and you can certainly focus on the one where you can provide more value to your employer. Finally, we touch on the subject of whether developer advocates and those in the developer relations team should be involved to some extent in product development, for example, helping to build the SDK. This is an open question, and I've seen lots of different companies take lots of different approaches. Of course, in the very early days of a startup, everybody has to do everything. But once you're more established and you've built out your teams, what relation does the developer advocate have to the core product in terms of actual software development? All right, let's talk to Alvin. Alvin, welcome to the Fireside with Voxgig podcast. It is great to have you on here today, this very, very cold day. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, just it's good to be inside, not be outside. It's raining right now, and it's just bad.
We just identified ourselves as being in the northern hemisphere. Hello to the southern hemisphere, you lucky guys, and your lovely weather.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a good time for a fireside chat.
Absolutely. I was speaking to some Brazilian developers yesterday, and 23 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. 60, 70, something like that.
T-shirt weather.
Very comfortable weather. Okay, let's get started. You are a developer advocate. You've moved into the developer relations career track.
Yes.
But it's pretty new for you. You started off as a front-end developer. So let's go through the story, because a lot of people are thinking of, maybe it's an interesting career change. So how did you go from a traditional developer career path into DevRel?
So for me, I did a lot of DevRel stuff on the side. I think it's kind of a thing, when you're a developer to do talks and write articles and all of that. So I did that on for a few things. I did local meetup groups. I spoke in small conferences, nothing notable. But yeah, I did that for a while. But on top of a full-time job, again, as you said, as a regular front-end person, it was a lot because, preparing a talk is a lot of work and rehearsing and everything, plus, traveling. And even if, I was using local meetups to practice like a lot of people are. But yeah, it got a lot. And even just maintaining a website and writing regularly, all of this is a lot of work. And so I did that for a bit, and then I stopped because it got too much. And then 2 things sort of happened around 2021. I guess 3 things. Number 1 was I was feeling I was working at the Wall Street Journal. I was working on design systems and charts, and it was for someone who loves front end and interactions and data viz, it was a great gig. But I was feeling a little bit, again, this was 2021, so the last year and the previous year and a half, I guess, the news cycle and everything, it was a lot. And so I started feeling the first signs of like a burnout, or I guess it was burnout. I don't even know, but I just just like this kind of jadedness around the work that I didn't like. And I knew that I had done a lot of the DevRel stuff before and that I liked it. And at the same time, I started teaching at Codebar, which I'm happy to talk about more, but it's essentially it's a meetup. It was virtual at the time. That helps people who are learning to code. So people come to you with a problem, which could be anything really. So the idea is for every meetup they try to have the same number of students as the same number of more experienced coaches or tutors. So people come in with a problem, which could be anything really. It could be like, I'm doing JavaScript basics. What's an array? Like what's this for loop thing? I don't really understand what's going on. Or I'm building this recipe app for my portfolio because I'm interviewing for jobs and I have a bug somewhere. I'm not really sure what's going on. Can you help me? So as a coach at Codebar, this is what you do. So this was a lot more on the teaching side of things. Okay. And I realized that I really liked it. And also it was really nice to just like be very close to like users and like actual people, because for my job at the Wall Street Journal, I was working on editorial tools. So my audience was internal graphics reporters. So if you consider the distance that there is, I guess, between my code and like an actual user of the Wall Street Journal, it was a lot. Like because my code goes to the graphics reporter, which then makes something, which then goes onto the website, which then goes onto a user, right? Which again, like it's there's nothing wrong with that. But with Codebar, when I had this immediate sort of one-to-one relationship with someone in the context of teaching, or them being an actual, I guess, user of what I was doing, it was just really, really nice. And all of these things combined. And the third thing was that in, again, the end of 2021, the market was crazy. Like nothing like what we have right now. There was every company left and right was struggling to hire. We had tons of investment being poured in on lots of companies. There were tons of companies that had just raised millions and seed rounds and Series A and B and whatever, and it just felt like the right time to try something new. So that's it. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, and it's kind of it sounds like you were born to be a developer advocate.
Nah.
What's interesting to me is before you kind of made this career choice and before you worked at the Wall Street Journal, you were doing developer advocate stuff for your employer. And did your company support that? Did they fund travel, or was it something they tolerated?
Tolerated is the right word. And I think they were supportive in the philosophical sense, in that if I needed to take an afternoon off to work on like slides or whatever, that was good. It wouldn't be like I would never be able to take a week off, for example. But yeah, so they were supportive in that sense. But yeah, they never funded travel. Again, so when I was at the Wall Street Journal, this was during pandemic year, so there was no travel.
That makes sense.
Between like 2021 to 2022, basically. 2020 to 2022. So this was but even in previous employers, like because there were more than one. I think it was mostly the same thing. Like people were happy that you did it, but they were not necessarily give you that time or money to do that. I mean, I know there are tons of employers that do it, don't get me wrong. Like, so it's like, I know, for example, in London, there's a lot of companies that, would open their offices to host meetups. So there's lots of employers who are really into that. I just never happened to work for them. So the DevRel things, I guess, were separate from my employment. Like, I most of the time I would also talk about things that were quite different to what I was doing on the like day-to-day basis. It was mostly like experiments I did on the side and stuff like that I was more excited to talk about.
Well, it's fascinating to me, right? Because I've worked with so many companies and founded a few, and I mean the developer relations activity was really important to our success, to selling and to hiring. And even if people were doing talks and there was just a tiny little logo on the last slide, or there wasn't even a logo, but they just said the name of the company, it paid off. The return from that investment is huge. I just find it really hard to understand a company that doesn't, when they have somebody like yourself who's willing to go out there and torture themselves producing content, that they're not hugely supportive. It's I guess I guess you have to gravitate towards the companies that do understand the value of what you do.
Yeah, and I think again it really varies. It's just like there's loads of employers that recognize it. I think to me, as you said, one of the biggest points is hiring. I think there's companies that do understand the value of hiring, and talent in general. And I think that's broadly where it sits, because like some companies will be like, we'll be crazy with benefits, and they really try hard to attract and retain people. And that's not all of them. I think the Dow Jones Wall Street Journal was one of them. It's just it happened that it was 2020 to 2022, so nothing happened. I mean, a lot happened in the news, but not in the conference spaces. Not much happened. So I think there's like looking at employers in general. I think that's where, to me, that's where the divide leads, where they're like, oh yeah, for sure, we need to have a good image with developers because we want people to apply to us. We want to be an attractive employer for people to work at. And I think like to me that's kind of where that divide is between employers who understand that and those that don't.
Yeah. That said, I mean, I think it feels like the understanding that there's a need for developer relations and the developer advocate role has certainly become well recognized. I certainly hope so.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Like you saw that. You saw that again in 2021 with again all that startup investment that happened. For me, it was never the right place to apply because I was new to the field. But there were tons of people who like had just went through like a seed round, and they were like, right, now we have a product, we have something, let's get a DevRel function going. And so sometimes even before like actual marketing, like they would hire DevRel before they'd hire like even content writers. So I agree with you.
Bad strategy. So you were doing DevRel style activities long before it was your official job.
Yeah.
But now that it has become your official job and you've been doing it for 6 months, a year?
6 months, yeah.
6 months. So, I mean, here's the cliche question, right? So what was surprising in the role, given that you had done this type of stuff before, but when you're doing it for real, for money,
yeah,
what's different?
Yeah.
What was stuff that surprised you about the role that you hadn't really thought of before?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. The first one is that you really have to work on the right product. It's something I had read online. It was one of the because you read like these generic, advice type posts, which is pick the right product, make sure you have a great team, whatever. And that one was kind of a throwaway thing for me, but no, it's super important because you're as a DevRel, you're talking about your product all the time. But it's not just that. It's like, I mean, you're obviously you're immersed in your product. You're always in it. You're always using it. You're always talking about it. But I think what's most important is you're thinking about all the problems that are around the product. So, for example, for me at Contentful, it's all about the I can relate to developers, building websites, doing front end stuff, and thinking about front end as a domain, I guess, as a problem in general is what I like. But for example, if I worked for, I don't know, like Kubernetes, for example, which is like this cloud DevOps thing that I have no clue about, it would be hard for me to relate to the actual this whole domain of like doing cloud scaling and managing servers and everything, because A, I've never done it, and B, again, I don't know the audience. So it could be a great thing to learn, if you're willing to, to get in. I think it's a great way to get into a problem space if you want to really dive deep into it. But if you happen to, to start your first DevRel job in a company that's kind of not really your thing, I think you'll struggle. And that was a surprise, how much like you're thinking about the surrounding, your product itself, and again, all the surrounding ideas. And yeah, it's an immersion. That's what I said. And I think the second thing that surprised me, and it kind of reinforces what I just said, it's at least at Contentful we get a lot of autonomy. Like there's no one behind my back saying, that, or with a really plan that says, all right, you have to have 12 blog posts this year, 2 events, I don't know, 4 podcasts, whatever. It's more like we have goals, we have targets. It's not just a free for all thing. But how we achieve the goals and how, and even your day to day is pretty open. I mean, sometimes we have concrete things like we know that there are certain blog posts we need to write. We know that there's certain features of the product that are coming up that we are going to need to talk about. But the day to day is quite flexible, and I think that's part of the nature of the job because it can involve so many things, right? So it could be organizing an event one day, and then again writing a blog post the other day, then being on a podcast like I am right now. So and I think that's where this autonomy comes from. It's because it's such a flexible, sort of free flowing stream of activities that happen all the time that it would be very hard to have this, very task based, style of management.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think there is a wide range of DevRel structures. Certainly, some people that we talk to have a lot more formal measurement of their work. Do you guys do that at all in terms of measuring?
Yes. Yeah. Maybe I didn't emphasize that. Yeah. No, we definitely do. Maybe I didn't emphasize that enough. But yeah, we have goals and targets, and they're very clear. And we meet up. We have strategies. We have ways of achieving those goals, and we have again these metrics that we're accountable for. But again, like whether would I need to do 4 or 5 podcasts? Like it's that type of thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, is it no, it's definitely the 6th podcast that's going to get me there. It's very hard to make that correlation.
So that's where the autonomy lies. In Contentful, which is that they're relying on your expertise to understand the channels where you have to talk to where the developers are, right? Or what content they're looking for.
Yes. And the great thing that we do, and I think that was such a brilliant idea from my boss, Jen. So when we started, she did an exercise that is great that she calls the love, like, hate. So we list, like, we go with the brainstorm, we list all the activities we can think of. And everyone in the team can put a card and say they either love it, like it, or hate it. And that's a great way to assess like what people want to do and their strengths.
Okay, this is just developer advocate activities now.
Yes.
Not like, surfing or something.
No. Yeah.
Okay. It's not okay. It's slightly more focused.
Yeah, not like eating. Like
barbecues.
Yeah. Trying restaurants. Yes, I like that. I love that.
DevRel activities if you look sideways. Yeah,
No,
that's
so yeah,
okay.
so it's a great exercise, and that also helps determine. Okay, so maybe Alvin should be on podcast because he likes it. Maybe we have obviously we have a new community person who just started, no, not just started, who started recently, and she's all over all the community stuff. For obviously, she's all over being on online communities and like talking to people and all of that, when like a lot of us weren't. We were more about, let's go to meetups, let's write blog posts, and and again, this is why it works. It just means playing to your strength, really.
Yeah, because the community engagement activity is different, right? I'd say that it's a part of developer relations, but it is a specific skill set. And if you're not, if it's not something you're good at, it would be very difficult to do well.
Yeah, and it's part of the 3 Cs of DevRel, which I'm sure you've heard about.
Well, let's go through those for those who are learning.
Oh, sure, yeah. So that came out in 2014 from the SendGrid team and Brendan West. So the idea is, again, we're talking about DevRel activities. And the idea is to divide them into 3 Cs. So the letter C. So you got code, content, and community. So code is more like your SDKs. It's it's more like the DevX side of things, but it can be product feedback and all that stuff. Content is, it makes sense now. We're in the age of content now. So yeah, it's podcasts, it's blog posts, it's YouTube videos, whatever we can think of. And the last C is community. So, and that's more, again, like meetups, it's online, Discord groups, it's, the Stack Overflow and everything. So yeah, these are the 3 Cs. And usually, and it's a great way also to think about DevRel in terms of, okay, where do I sit? There are people who like doing all 3 and are good at all 3 that exist, but often often people tend to, be stronger in 1 or 2.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's okay. So it's an interesting way of looking at it, because on the surface, I would have said that doing all 3 is kind of essential to the developer advocate role.
Yes,
but
definitely.
If you have a team, you can ask people to play to their strengths, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just guessing from what you're saying, you're more on the code and content side, or do you do
exactly? Yeah.
That said, you have launched a meetup, which we'll talk about.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Again, I like it. It's about strength. Like, some people are excellent at 3, but in my experience, at least with interacting with DevRel people, both in and out of the job, I can tell people are usually very strong at 2 and have a 3rd one that they obviously do, but that are not as strong, which doesn't mean they're terrible. It just means not as strong.
Community kind of covers, well, I don't know, like doing talks at a conference, is that content or is that community?
I don't know. I think it's,
you could say,
I think it depends on the format, right? I guess it's very different to do a keynote with 10,000 people versus...
Yeah, that's definitely content.
Right. Versus doing like a small talk where it's like 20 people in a beer garden somewhere.
And you talk to them afterwards, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, well, so just focusing on code for a minute, here's an interesting question for you. And
yes,
I don't know if you're free to talk about this with respect to Contentful, but I'm kind of interested. You guys have an SDK, I'm sure.
Yes.
Mm. So who writes the SDK? Is it the developer advocates, or is it a separate team? And which one should it be?
Right. So that's also a sort of nebulous thing. So in my experience, applying to DevRel roles, sometimes there isn't a hard line between that. So the whole SDK and APIs and making sure this is good and integrated, that I think that usually falls into more like what people call DevX, so like developer experience. So people doing that are generally called developer experience engineers. But it depends. Again, in my job search, I found job descriptions that were developer experienced engineers and that were developer advocates. That were just basically just content, again, the 3 Cs I just talked about, and like no SDKs at all. But generally, the people who do SDKs and more on the code side of things are just our developer experience, which are different from developer advocates, but that varies between companies a lot. So at Contentful, we don't. So at Contentful, DevRel is purely focused on, again, the 3 Cs. But more, again, we don't really touch SDKs. So we have SDKs on a lot of languages, for example. So we have JavaScript, Python, Go, I believe we might have Java as well, .NET. So like covering that as a DevRel team would be harder, for example.
Yeah. Yes. And do you then feed back to the DX guys or girls about what you're hearing back from the community and what people are telling you?
Yes, and the smaller the company, the quicker that feedback loop is in general.
Okay.
And this is where also it gets nebulous, because if you're a smaller company, if your entire company is 15 people, well, you're kind of doing everything as well. It's a lot. Even if you're mostly doing content community, it's very easy for you to open a quick PR over there and just change some things.
I'm just going to go deeper on the SDK. I want to get your opinion on something.
Yeah.
So in my other life, we do consulting for startups, mostly helping them take their MVPs to production. And one of the things that we're always doing is integrating with many third-party services. And for any project, it could easily be up to 10, 15 third-party services, right? These days, of course, a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there's a report from Okta that came out, which was insane to me. I think it was the average company uses something like 80 tools.
Yeah,
it's just nuts.
But from a developer experience point of view, I think the industry has a bit of work to do, because every single time for every single SDK or API, you've got to sit down, you've got to read the docs, and they all do authentication in a different way, and they all do configuration in a different way, and they all have different constraints. And some of them have wonderful docs and example code, and others are, oh my God, just kind of crazy. Right? It was obviously, I don't know, they outsourced documentation or something. The industry still does not seem to have focused on a standard way of doing things, right? When I, as a developer, want to use an SDK, I want to go on a standard pathway. I want to do all of the authentication, all that sort of stuff, pretty much the same way for every tool, and that isn't there yet. From a DX perspective, it's chaos. Total chaos.
Total chaos.
I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, or what we should do as an industry. I mean, maybe there should be standards or something. I don't know.
It's a tricky one. I think it's getting better. I tend to agree with you, but I think it's getting better, especially in the last, I would say, 4 years or so. We went from, as you said, here's the docs, good luck, to we now we have these turnkey scripts. You see tons of companies that just have a one command thing, which is just get started, and it's NPX, NPX. I mean, we can just say NPX Contentful create or whatever, or NPX Svelte, whatever. So this has improved a lot. But I think I think we're getting better at it, and I think there's one part of that is people are really starting to treat things like terminals as part of the developer experience, which wasn't the case before. Which is good, because now if you want to, with Svelte, for example, if you run their installer. Like you have a bunch of options. It's all color coded. It will install your dependencies for you. Stuff like that was very rare. Like again, 5 years ago, and I mean it still existed, but it's becoming more of a standard, as you said. Like it's not an official standard, but more of a, I guess a table stake feature in a way that you could just run a terminal command and get started, and then
I would agree. Right, table stakes. It's just from the practical on the ground experience. I'd say only half of the companies have any sort of reach any sort of acceptable standard, really.
I think even half is probably generous.
Probably is. Okay, let's stop our ranting about APIs and SDKs. And I'm sure Contentful is wonderful. I hope to use it at some point.
Sweet. Yeah.
Let's talk about you. Let's talk one last thing. You recently set up a meetup, which is something.
Yes.
As the developer advocate role grows within companies, and as people do more developer relations, a lot of companies are realizing that they have to engage with meetups, either sponsor them or help to run them or start them up. And that's something you recently did. So take us through that whole process.
It was not easy. So we had an event. It was the first in-person event for Contentful in London since 2019 that we ran in October, and it was good. Yeah. So I was in the UK, so it was easier for me to call venues and also I knew London as well, so it was easier to say, this place is really hard to get to. Like no one will go.
Sure.
So I had this knowledge, which was helpful because sometimes it's hard. You can like.
I've done meetups in remotes in cities where we're just
right.
Stuff. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a lot of work, and I think part of one thing we would do differently, which sounds obvious, but is to really think about these things in advance. And it might be, especially if you're starting from scratch, because when you have a meetup that already exists, that has a cadence, that has 2 or 3 regular venues, it's a lot easier to not think of things that far ahead, because there's already sort of a system in place. But we had nothing, and it was kind of a one-off thing as well, even though we want to do more.
Sure.
But it wasn't going into like a venue and say, hey, we're going to be there every second Thursday for a year. It was more, okay, we need to figure this out. We didn't even know how many people were going to show up. Even if we, I think that was from the speakers. We were really lucky. I think that we managed to get some really good speakers, and even just a good crowd. Like people stayed afterwards for at least an hour when after all the talks were done, which is to me a really good sign. I think it's.
You find that it's finding a venue. How did you find that? Because before COVID, there were lots of companies that would give you space. Very easy to find venues, really. Is that different now for an in-person meetup? Have the companies opened up again, or is it more difficult?
I think some companies are definitely back to their 2019 self, and these ones are still there. And I think there are still some that are again willing to sponsor stuff. In terms of opening their offices. These companies still exist. I'm not sure if there are as many. It would be hard for me because I don't have a point of comparison. I can't tell you I did this in 2019 and did that in 2022, sure. And these things were different. But I still think there are, at least I would assume in big cities, there are companies willing to open their offices and support communities. I think it's probably similar to what we said earlier, probably in the things that are similar to what they work on. but yeah, I think there are companies winning, but also you can still find like regular venues, and they're still pretty happy to host. I think venues in general are quite happy to have a meetup because it's easy for them. Like they don't have to cook anything. If their place offers food, or they have all the pre-orders in advance, they don't have to deal with customers. Yes. You could just say, right, give me 30 meals tonight, and it's all they have to do. So they're generally pretty happy, and because it's a much more predictable evening for them.
Trust me, that's a lot easier than phoning up the pizza place that hasn't turned up with your 8 large pizzas. 30 hungry guests.
Yes.
Speaker that has to leave because the babysitter needs to stay much longer. Yes. Yeah, meetups are super fun. Are you going to do more? Will you do it again? Will you make it regular?
We're not sure. I think one thing we want to do more for the upcoming year is more sponsoring of existing meetups. And as you said, it was one of the things you raised earlier was either doing meetups, rather in sponsoring it by giving away a venue, or just sponsoring food or whatever. So we want to do the latter more. Yeah. So yeah, we'll be again in an effort to sort of meet developers where they are. We want to again go into local user groups and see if we can help. And we're drafting that strategy right now.
Will it be London again, or are you going to do it?
Oh, ideally in more places. Yeah, I don't have anything yet, but yeah, ideally more places. Like I would love to get involved in a meetup, maybe even in Belfast or Dublin or something like that.
Oh yeah. Well, we have our Guinness is much better. So.
Yes.
We get it straight from the factory. Okay, Alvin, with that, I think I look forward to having a pint of Guinness with you next year at some point.
For sure.
Thank you so much. Super, super interesting. And great to kind of provide people with almost a role model pathway into the developer advocate career. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
You can find the transcript of this podcast and any links mentioned on our podcast page at voxgig.com/podcast. Subscribe for weekly editions where we talk to the people who make the developer community work. For even more, read our newsletter. You can subscribe at voxgig.com/newsletter or follow our Twitter @Voxgig. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.